Today, my dear 21st century Victorians, we take our next step in our history-bounding capsule wardrobe, creating our first skirt. If you've never made a garment before, this is a great first project. And don't worry, we'll be doing it together the whole way. If you have questions or you run into any problems at all, please let me know in the comments. I'm here and I'm happy to help. If you have watched part 1 of this, you've already selected your pattern and fabric, pre-washed it, and pressed it. If you didn't watch part 1 and you have no idea what I'm talking about, go over and check that out. I'll link it in the description below. We'll wait. Now that we've got that taken care of, it's time to pull out our pattern. If you bought the PDF version of the pattern, print out all the pieces and then painstakingly tape them carefully together. You'll want to make sure the grids line up. The instructions on this are pretty good. If you ordered a physical copy of the pattern, replace this step for waiting for it to arrive in the mail. Either way, once you've got it ready to work with, lay it out. If you've got a big dining table or a work table, that's great. If you don't, think of your floor as the biggest work surface in the house. Though I would definitely start by vacuuming up the bunny hair. There are 2 ways to proceed from here. You can either cut out all your pattern pieces to the size that you need them, and then trace them onto your garment and go. Or what you can do is take your original pattern, trace the pattern pieces onto a new roll of paper. You can use pattern paper, or I use a roll of poster paper I got for a couple dollars at Michael's. For this project, I did a combination of the two. I had already made a full-length skirt from the pattern, and I cut the pattern pieces out for that. However, I know that I might want to make that skirt again, better, much better, and so I'd like to have those pieces to use. Because of that, I didn't want to cut the skirt pieces to the new length. So again, I traced the pieces I had already cut at the shorter length onto pattern paper. I'll go over how to shorten the pattern in a minute. Whichever you do, please take great care to transfer all your pattern markings. This is how you'll know which pieces match up to each other, and how to preserve any design elements, like how high the placket should sit. I'll make another note on getting started here. If you have never made a skirt before, or this pattern is significantly different from any other pattern you've ever made, you'll want to start by making a muslin, also called a mock-up. A muslin is made from a cheaper fabric, which you don't mind potentially ruining. For most of my muslins, I use a bolt of lightweight woven cotton I bought for less than $2 a yard at a local Amish shop. Whatever you use, your muslin should be similar in weight, body, and stretch to the fabric you plan to use in your finished garment. For example, do not use a stretchy synthetic fabric if your final garment will be made out of a heavy woven cotton. The drape and the fit will be completely different between the two fabrics, so no matter how carefully you fit on the stretchy synthetic, it will all be for naught once you move to the woven cotton. Muslins are great for 2 reasons. 1, the fitting that we've already talked about, but 2, if you're trying something new or it has a complicated design element you've never done before, it's a great way to get to do a dry run on a less precious fabric. When making a muslin for size, do a basting stitch. If you're not familiar with this, it's a longer stitch that can easily be pulled apart. On a machine, this means set your stitch length to 4 to 5. When hand sewing, it just means make longer stitches. This will make your muslin easier to rip apart and resize as needed. Don't be afraid to write on, cut up, chest out stitches, do whatever you need to your muslin to make it a good pattern for your final garment. The whole point is to be something that you can destroy as needed to be successful in the end. Also remember that more complicated garments may require even more muslins. A quick note on fitting this skirt. Truly Victorian provides details on how to fit the skirt, but I will give you a demo using my own size here. For the waist measurement, which is the top of your skirt gores, use your waist measurement and figure out what letter that corresponds to. I have a 36-inch waist, so for me that is size I. I have 43-inch hips, which is size H. In my case, the difference was so small that I did not bother grading the pattern, especially since this would make the skirt slightly narrow where it starts to widen. However, if, for example, your waist was an I and your hips a J, you would want to grade that. To do that, in either direction, choose size I for your waist. Now measure the distance from your waist to hip on your body. Make a mark at that distance from the top of the pattern. Now draw a new line that connects these 2 points. When you cut out the pattern, this will be your cutting line. Repeat for all pattern pieces. For the waistband in this skirt, use your waist measurement only. You have one other change to make to this pattern before you cut out your pieces. Decide the length you want this skirt to be. You can do this by having someone else measure from your waist to the point on your leg you want it to fall, or you can let the tape measure hang like so and check the measurement. This is a bit less accurate, but will do in a pinch. Remember to leave a little bit extra on the bottom for a seam allowance, in this case a 1/2 inch. Now measure the distance from the top of the skirt pieces along each side in the middle. Connect the dots. This is your new length. You will also need to make stiffener panels. These are marked on the original piece, but obviously will not be marked on your shorter pieces. And the original pieces will be too big for your new panels. So to do this for my pattern, I measured the height of the stiffener panels on the original pieces and then drew a new line on my new skirt pieces at that height from the bottom. This made the stiffener panels the correct size for the new skirt. Should you choose, you can also make the original panels then cut them down. But that felt a bit more complicated to me. Once you have done all of that, you will need to first cut out your patterns, then trace your patterns onto your fabric and cut out 2 sets of everything, one from your main fabric and one from your lining fabric. If you are using a different fabric for the stiffener panels, you will cut out those panels from your stiffener and again from your lining fabric. When you cut your paper pattern out, you will want to make sure you keep the pattern markings. For example, this arrow here indicates that this piece should match up right here with the matching arrow on the next pattern piece. I like to copy them over by cutting a little arrow that extends out past the edge of the pattern. For tracing your pattern onto your fabric, I suggest weighting down the pattern and tracing with a water-soluble fabric pen or chalk onto your fabric. Which you use will depend on what kind of fabric you have. Chalk, especially white chalk, tends to show up better on dark fabric, whereas I find that fabric pen generally shows up better on light fabric. You should always test whatever you are using on a scrap of the fabric before committing. Make sure that whatever you choose shows up well enough to see, comes off in some way, and does not damage the fabric. For pattern weights, I suggest anything within arm reach that is heavy enough to weight down your pattern so that it will not shift. I frequently use my scissors, rulers, cell phone, whatever I can get. I also like to write the letter of each pattern piece on the fabric in the corner, somewhere that I know will be in the seam allowance. This makes it much clearer which pattern piece is which after you've cut them all out. There is one other thing I would like to point out on tracing your patterns. You'll note that I'm taking my yellow quilting ruler and using it to line up the grain line, those straight lines on the pattern, with the grain line of the fabric, either the fold or the selvage. You want this to be consistently parallel all the way across the pattern piece. It's time to flatline all the things. The nice thing about flatlining is that it is super easy. Just match up each piece to its lining piece, wrong sides together, and baste securely all the way around. You can even do this by machine with a 4 or 5 stitch length. You will now just treat these pieces as one piece of fabric with the skirt fabric as the right side and the lining fabric as the wrong side. After flatlining all the pieces, you are going to sew them together mostly as instructed. For your placket, if you do not have an overlocker or serger, or wish to hand finish the seams, make sure to do this before any of the top stitching, or you may find your seam allowance too small to fell. Should you want to hand fell your seams, please see my video on hand felling a seam with pockets. If you want pockets in this skirt, because of course you do, you will want to add those as you are sewing the skirt panels together. The pockets need to be sewn in between skirt side B and skirt back side piece C. Again, my video on hand felling pocket seams also talks about how to add the pocket piece to the side seam so that you can hand fell the seams to finish. To decide the height of the pockets, use the super scientific method of holding the skirt panel up to your body, putting your hand where it feels natural to have a pocket, then marking the top of that point with a pin. This will be the top of your pocket. Then sew in the pocket and finish sewing the rest of your panels together. We are going to end today's missive here to leave you to your 3 metric lifetimes of hand felling seams. In our next installment, we will start at the very exciting phase of adding a waistband. But I will add a couple of quick postscripts before I go. Postscript number the 1st. You do not have to hand fell the seams, but it is a lovely effect. If you have a serger, you can serge or overlock them. You can zigzag stitch them if you don't. These are much quicker but decidedly more modern ways of finishing your seam. However, if anyone is judging the inside of your skirt, kindly suggest that they find better hobbies. Or rudely suggest it since apparently they are all up in your skirt right now. Postscript number the 2nd. You can hand fell each of the seams as you go, or you can hand fell them all at once you have all of the skirt pieces sewn together, while watching the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. You will have time. Just make sure that you start doing this before you've added the waistband or put in the stiffener panels, otherwise you won't be able to properly finish the seams all the way. Postscript number the 3rd. You only have to finish your seams up to a little bit below where the stiffener panels start. Below the stiffener panels will be encased by the stiffener panels, and so those raw seam edges won't be exposed. I forgot this. I hand felled every inch of those seams. Maybe that's why it felt like 3 metric lifetimes. In closing, please do share in the comments how you're getting on with this. I'm really excited to hear about everyone's history-bounding efforts, and I'd also like to know if anything is unclear. Do you have questions? Are there places I can help? Would you like to vent about exactly how much time you've spent with your trusty seam ripper? We're going to be at this for a while, so let's take some time to get to know each other. And I remain, as ever, your faithful servant and 21st century Victorian, Frances Worthington.